Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Hi, I am John Ackerlind, an alcoholic. I am very enthusiastic about this program, and I'm very grateful for this way of life. It's terrific. I first like to thank the committee for the invitation, James, the rest of the people here. I like to thank Sidney and Shirley for picking us up, and Roger and Jan for spending all the time with us. It really is hospitality here. I think I've gained 10 pounds. Seems like half the population here are cooks. You know, it's just wonderful. I like to say that I'm so grateful that I was here today and could listen to Paul Keebler again. I think he's the most moving, loving, wonderful person that I have ever met in Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank you for that, Paul. I like to say that I have had a great fortune in growing up in a group in Laguna Beach where there is a lot of sobriety. 32, 34, 38, 40, 41, 42 years of sobriety. And you and I who are younger on the program owe those people a lot. Because when they came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, this was not a sure thing. It was a maybe, perhaps. It was an illusion and a hope. But due to the fact of those guys and girls' dedication, you and I, we have something today that is for fact and reality that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works. And let us give those old-timers a hand, okay? Thank you. I have a bunch of friends in this room that I love very much. But most of you have never seen me before, but in a very short while you will know me very intimately. And it's just one of the fabulous things that happen in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, that we can know each other on that level. Doing a great job there. I don't think I'm too presumptuous if I say that some of us here tonight sit with a bunch of burdens and lots of if-onlys. But be that as it may, we all here in these rooms are still the lucky ones because we have a chance. Lots of people who have this thing called alcoholism doesn't have a chance, and for various reasons. For the record, my grandfather died from alcoholic delirium in 1910. He lived in a 2,000-acre place outside Stockholm, and that's what happened to him. My father had a problem with his liver in 1927, and nobody knew anything about this illness then. He was a giant of a man. He radiated vitality. Women adored him and men envied him, but he died 3 years later, and he only weighed 130 pounds when he died, and he didn't want to die at all. And he didn't have much of a chance. I was 8 years old then. And it is something to see a beautiful human being like he once was, 6'2". When he touched you, you realized its strength, but in 3 years he had deteriorated to absolutely nothingness. And I like to make a point when it comes to my father. I hear from time to time from these podiums these days that some of us blame our parents for our own alcoholism. I don't share that opinion. I really became an alcoholic because I drank alcohol myself. It's really that simple. My father was an aristocrat. He was very vain, very proud, very arrogant, but he was also a very loving person. But there was some violence there, and that's what I would like to make a point about. You and I are the lucky ones. We have a program that deals with injustices on both sides of the aisle, theirs and ours. And wouldn't that be rather sad after we come in here and find this way to live that we still pin it on somebody else? I know this statement doesn't make some people happy because they like to hang on to that goddamn thing. I like Michael Caine's line when somebody said to him, "Hey, have a nice day," and he said, "No, I have other plans," you know. I like to assure you that I do not criticize anybody else's program whatsoever. The point that I'm trying to make is this, that thanks to this program, I have been able to forgive my father for the violence there was on a few occasions. Okay? Soon. My older brother didn't have much of a chance for another reason. He had a little bit of pride. And it seems to be a commodity that we can't afford the luxury of in this outfit. 20 years ago, he lived in a castle outside Stockholm. He was married to a very beautiful girl. In fact, he married my girlfriend. I had a little bit of problem with that for a while. But now I'm glad he did. He drank like I drank, and he blew it all. And for 18 years, he defended his right to drink. Something to see this insidious denial that some of us have when it comes to this thing. He was a guy that made $150,000 a year, spoke 6 languages fluently, carried the Swedish flag in the Olympics on 3 occasions, but for 18 years he lived in a room that cost $15 a month to live in and drank a fifth of whiskey every night and just lived in the past. And he finally died 2.5 years ago from yellow jaundice, and that's what happened to him. And there was nothing wrong with him ever. You know, that's how it is. My younger brother is a little similar. 8-9 years ago now, his doctor told him he couldn't drink alcohol anymore because there was something wrong with his liver. And he told him that for 90 days, but he doesn't drink the way I did, and that's all he's looking at. He has 7-8 whiskeys before dinner, 2 kinds of wine, coffee and brandy for dessert. It's kind of elegant. He even lights a couple of candles now and then. It looks just like the commercial. It really is bullshit the whole day, you know. It really wonder sometimes, what's wrong with my brothers? Nothing. Alcohol did something for my older brother to the day he died. It's still doing something for my younger brother. And that's the nature of the illness, and that's why I said in the beginning that you and I are the lucky ones, because we have a chance. There are these evidences in these rooms that people like you and I, the way we drank and carried on, that we can change and live without it and have fabulous life. And that is really what I think the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is all about, how to live good out there with ourselves and our fellow man. It's a beautiful thing. I talk to newcomers. I love newcomers. I like the feelings in these rooms when there are newcomers, and I like being a newcomer myself. It's very important to me, and I like to share with you why I like to be a newcomer. I hope I never forget the last year I drank, because I compromised on everything I believed in and stood for. I couldn't live or function without liquor. I didn't dare to go to sleep if I didn't have a fifth of whiskey in the refrigerator, because I had to have it when I woke up, and if I ran out of booze at midnight, I usually called an associate of mine in Baldwin Park and said, "Harold, next week you will owe me $150 on this particular job, but if you give me $20 tonight, you won't have to pay me the $130 next week." And I drove 100-mile round trip at midnight to pick up $20. I didn't dare to buy any booze in Baldwin Park because then I wouldn't make it home. When I came home to Anaheim, where we lived at the time, I bought a fifth of Imperial Bourbon for $4.85, and then I was safe, and I had to live like that, and I hope I never forget that period in my life. I know some of us, after we get a little well, and get a few dollars in our pockets and bedroom privileges again, forget how it really was. In fact, Karen cut me off 6 months before I came into AA. She really ran out of humor at the end, I tell you. She stood down and looked at me one evening and said, "John, I wish you could find yourself a girlfriend so I wouldn't have to fool with you." I said, "You take forever." Well, after sobriety, if it take forever, it's very commendable. It really ain't fair, you know. The other reason why I like to be a newcomer, I'd been going to meetings every day for 90 days. And Phil Petty talked one Sunday morning, and he stood up here and said, if you keep going to meetings, you will wake up one morning and realize and find out you can function without alcohol. And it is not necessary to drink anymore, and you have a way to go. And I sat in that room and I said, my God, I have experienced those feelings. And it was the first time here it dawned on me that I wasn't hooked anymore. That I had some degree of choice over my own actions, and I'd already started to experience a freedom here that I hadn't had for a long, long time, and I hope I never forget that period in Alcoholics Anonymous. The knowledge that I wasn't hooked and that I was free, and I hope I never take it for granted. Those are the two reasons why I like to be a newcomer. I didn't start drinking until I was 31 years old. I know it doesn't sound very promising right now, but that's how it was. And I'd like to share with you how I was when I was a young man. First of all, the reason I didn't drink until I was 31, when my father died, I promised my grandmother I was never going to drink, so I didn't drink. When I was 19 years old, I had gone to college a year. The war broke out. I was in the Air Force for 2.5 years. And after that, I went back to college for a year and a half. I was selling at night, and I was trying to help my mom. It was very important to me to play the man of the house. My older brother was different. He was brilliant in school. He had scholarships to universities, and everything was mapped out for him. But I was different, and I could never figure him and me out. You know, he never opened a book. He had A's in everything. I could study till 1 in the morning. I still failed. It really bothered me. I tell you, it bothered me till I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can be very good for a short time, and then the bottom falls out, and I couldn't figure out why I'm such a screw-up. When I was that age group, and for a long time I had an unbelievable inferiority complex. I'm a perfectionist on top of it, and that's not a good combination. I contemplated suicide a lot because I knew if I died I would be with my dad, and when he lived there was security and prestige and respect and all that goes with it. And I tell you what I did when I was young. I faked it. I pretended I was really together. I was very noisy and opinionated, and that gave me some false courage, and that's how I was when I was young. When I was 31 years old, I was employed by this door factory in Alhambra. My boss was alcoholic, and he taught me how to drink every day, and a new life began for me. You know, we had early times at 8 o'clock in the morning, cocktails at 10, martini lunches from 12 to 2:30, made a couple of calls in the afternoon, went back to the office and typed up bids from 6 to midnight and drank whiskey. And I thought I landed in heaven. I used to come home to Karen and say, you know, this building business is out of this world. I said, I never felt so good in my life, you know. And you know that it's a funny deal. Alcohol did something unbelievable for me. For 2 years I drank a minimum of 50 whiskey a day. I was never drunk for 2 years. I never hung over, never sick, just felt good. You know, it was just like all my emotional problems that I had when I grew up. It was just like they had never existed. It was just like the sky was the limit. I couldn't miss. The only problem the company had, they lost money every month. My boss and I, we used to have those alcoholic dialogues at midnight when we were both brilliant. One night he sat down and looked at his profit and loss statement, and one night he said, you know, I wish I could sell this outfit. Instead, I would buy an automobile dealership here in Alhambra. And I said, what do you know about the automobile business? He said, man, I've been driving for years. You know, in fact, I like that alcoholic attitude about the guy that drove down the road 90 miles an hour, rolled a car 6 times, got up on the other side and said, never again am I going to buy a goddamn Chevy, you know. However, when I had been there for a year, I had sold so many doors they couldn't pay me my commission, so they gave me 1/3 of the stock of the company, so now I own the place. When you own a place, you're general manager, sales manager, and truck driver. You do everything. I did. I worked 7 days a week, 16, 18 hours a day. And now I'm going to give you the highlight of my drinking career. You know, we lived in Corona del Mar at the time. We had our little plant up on Palm Avenue in Alhambra, and I had got a big contract with American Housing Guild in San Diego. I was supposed to deliver 7,000 door openings in 90 days. And I used to come home to Corona del Mar with a truckload of 400 door openings. Came home about 3:30 in the morning and carrying it a hot bath ready for me, and I slid in the tub and lit a camel and inhaled, you know, and lay down in the tub, you know, at 3:30 in the morning and smoked that camel. And she came in with a pitcher of martinis and sat down on the toilet and drank martinis with me. I mean, that's really living, you know. You lay down in that tub, you know, and smoke that camel and drink that martini and spit out the pimento, you know. You know. And then I usually said, you know, I'm just a little immigrant and I own the goddamn place, you know. A few years later, they fired me from my own door factory, you know. When I became the owner of the joint, there was 60 grand in the hole. I signed a piece of paper and indebted myself 20 grand overnight, and I thought I had a good deal. When I took my inventory in Alcoholics Anonymous, I realized that optimism was one of my defects of character. I had 3 beautiful girls in the sun, and we took them to church on Sundays. We did everything right to be Americans. The only problem with that church business was the last 4 years I drank, I was a morning drinker. She usually inspected me before we should leave, and many times she just looked at me and said, not today. Hurt my feelings when she took off down the street with the kids in the car, and I had to stand there in the corner at home, so sometimes I ran down the block after her, screaming and hollering, you know, and my neighbors were outside talking about the lawn problem, and here I came running by. And sometimes I was strangely clad. She saw me in the rearview mirror coming after her, so she stopped down the block and waited for me and rolled down the windows and said, what's the matter now, you know? And I said, don't forget to pray for me, you know. And when I got there, I didn't feel like I belonged, but God, I tried. I sat down, looked sincere, and hummed a lot, you know. I could take the sermon about 20 minutes max, and then I had to have a drink. 20 minutes into his talk, I just got up and said, oh, screw them all, you know what I mean? You know, they're just a bunch of hypocrites. And then I went home and I drank Grand Scotch those days, played good music, became very spiritual. You know, I love Stan Getz and Dave Brubeck, La Boheme, Coleman Hawkins, stuff like that. Seems like I have graduated to Pink Floyd and Brian Ferry, you know. I don't know what's going on here, you know. A couple of years later, it had progressed a little bit. One week she said, let us try the Episcopalian church next Sunday because the congregational certainly doesn't do the job. And I said, it sounds terrific. She said, yeah, they have very colorful costumes down there, sing a lot. You like music, it might hit you. I've been drinking till 5 that morning. I still had a shakes when I woke up, so I went out in the kitchen and drank a little codeine cough medicine and 2 shots of bourbon. Stopped the shakes, tightened my belt, walked around with small steps, tried to look effective, and passed inspection and came to church. The only thing I can say to you, the routine in the Episcopalian church, it really ain't for drunks. It's a very busy place, you know. I mean, they get up and down and kneel and pray and sit and stand and sing. I was up and down 3-4 times, then my timing got off, you know. When they sat down, I stood up, you know. In Sweden, when we don't know the words, we sing Tra La La. I had a couple of solos there all by myself. In fact, the second time I came up there and gave the Tra La La, you could hear a guy 5 rows behind me. He said, "Sit down, you son of a bitch." Third time down praying, I couldn't get up again, you know. I clung to that bench. I tried every trick in the book I knew to get up and couldn't make it. Tried it sideways and backwards and forward. I even tried to roll up. And she sat down and looked at me and said, "For God's sake, Johnny, get up." And I said, "It's an absolute impossibility, you know." So they went up and down, and I sat down and sang by myself. Next time I looked behind me, they were all down praying, and here's this guy in the robe, and he was laying down his knees with his chin in his hand, and he mumbled, and he looked real serious, and he looked right at me. And I sat down on the floor and stared at him. You know, sometimes you look at the guy, you focus in, and you lock, and you can't move, you know. And he stared at me, and I stared at him, and then I thought I better look a little casual, so I winked my eye. It kind of stopped him for a minute. So we didn't go back to the Episcopalian church. I know you're happy that I don't belong to your parish now. You know? I don't think alcoholics like me or drunks like me really have any problem with booze until we try to stop drinking. And when I started to try to stop drinking, I got into trouble with my liquor. One week, Karen said to me, "You know, you drink too much." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Johnny, you drink way too much booze." So I said, "Well, then I'll quit." And then I couldn't quit, and that's when it all began. When I had been off the sauce for 2 days, so I got the shakes, and then 2 shots of whiskey stopped the shakes. I could function and work. So then I had to con myself into I'd have a couple of drinks all the time. And then I started to lie about it, and then I was hiding it, and from then on it got worse. When I was into 2 or 3 years of my drinking, I was up to 2/5 of whiskey a day. The last year I drank, the last 10 months I drank 2 3/5 of whiskey a day, 2 small bottles of codeine cough medicine every day, 6 anisins 4 times a day, and I was absolutely weird. I could not get drunk, I couldn't get sober. The guilt was on all the time, and there was no relief, and I just thought I was going crazy, and I probably was. And sometimes I hear from these podiums about this alcoholic loneliness, and as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing like it. Because it is a total isolation. And we drink to live, and we know we are dying, there's no way out of it, and that's how it is. 2 years after the shakes began, weirder things happened to me when I stopped drinking. One morning at 4 o'clock, I sat straight up in my bed and looked in front of me, and this big white snake came out of the wall. I never saw anything like it in my life. Unbelievable. He came right out of the wall. He was snow white and 3 black eyes. He was this big in diameter on his fattest part, and he was 23 feet long. And he came slowly across the room, stopped right in front of my face, started to hiss at me. It was just like this, and tongue dangling, you know, and I could even smell him. It was kind of a Peralta, sweet mocha deal. The whole thing was incredible. And you know what my thinking was? I said, you know, I haven't had a drink for 3 days, so it can't be the booze, you know. I screamed so loud from fright that my brain exploded from my own sound, and then I fell backwards unconscious. That was my experience with it. My noise in my head from my own screams was so unbelievably loud, my brain just blew like a balloon. It was just like, pew! And then I blacked out and fell backwards unconscious. That was my experience with it. Karen told me in the morning, she said, something strange happened this morning around 4 o'clock. She said, you sat straight up, looked in front of you for quite a while, and then you said, One night I made love to her and she wasn't even there, and that's kind of tricky. She was laying 2 feet away from me there, and she said, "What are you doing over there?" And I said, "I beg your pardon." I mean, I always had a lot of class, you know. And when she realized what was going on, she started to laugh at me. I started to cry because I felt it was so humiliating to laugh at the guy who was doing his best. In the morning, I had been out in the kitchen. I had my codeine cough mist and my bourbon. She met me in the hallway, and she said, "Well, good morning, lover boy." You know. I really didn't feel any pain. I just smiled, and I said, "That's the best peace I've had in a long time." Needless to say, I love laughter in Alcoholics Anonymous. To me, it is a spiritual experience. To me, it is very much part of the recovery program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything that you and I have laughed a little bit about tonight was absolutely the deepest tragedy when it happened. But when you and I, in this manner of identification, when it comes to this insanity and this denial, can just laugh about the whole damn mess, it makes it possible for us to forgive ourselves and change. And it is very much part of the recovery program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Our story, like everybody's story, was sad before I came in here. We started over many times, and every time I had the best of intention, and every time it got worse. One time, you know, we should go to that Palm Springs deal and start over again. I was in the wagon for 3 weeks, you know. That time in my life, I hadn't had a vacation for 5 years. I didn't have to leave town, to be truthful with you, because I was safe there. They took my checks and they weren't always good. But I had a short account at Al's Party Panthers. I always got what I needed as far as liquor was concerned. And that morning we should leave, I drove 80, 90 miles an hour to Palm Springs. I drank a fifth before we left, and the children were crying. She was hysterical, and I had to get while it lasted. And Karen was convinced that it was my way of telling her I didn't love her anymore, wanted out of it, and didn't know how to say it. And the second day there, she just looked at me and said, I can't live like this any longer. And she drank 100 aspirins down and locked herself in the bathroom and said, "I'm going to commit suicide." And I laid on that bed and praying to God, hoping she was going to die so she didn't have to be with me anymore. Because I knew at that time of my life there was no way out of it for me, because I had really tried. 2 years after that incident, I came into AA. Now you can draw your own conclusion how those 2 years were and my guilt connected with it. It was the same year they fired me from my door factory. You should have seen my attitude about that. I mean, this is my means of income. And they came down and said, "Sign off," and I just signed. I said, "Who needs this headache anyhow? Now I can just drink and be happy." And that's how it goes. He'll take everything that's near and dear to us, you know. And that's how it is. 2 days before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, it was a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning. I was picked up at Thrifty Mart in Anaheim trying to steal a pint of liquor for $3.57. And you should have seen me that morning. I was drunk and unshaven. I weighed 246 pounds. I couldn't even defend myself. I just stood on whimpered, "It can't be me. Look where I came from." And I was brought up in a beautiful family under the most favorable circumstances. But that morning in Anaheim, I looked exactly like a person who has to steal a pint of liquor to live. I had an ultimatum that night and got off the sauce, and next day I had an appointment with a big developer, and I had a shakes bad, and I went into my bar in my office for 4 years to have a couple of shots I could function and see him, and 2 drinks didn't do it anymore. I had 7 or 8 or more, and then I knew I had had too much, and I didn't dare to blow that job too, and I just sat out there in the afternoon in my car in the parking lot and wept. I just said, "God, what has happened to me? What has happened to us? I had the most fabulous plans. Help me or let me die soon. I just can't hack it much longer." And the next day, Karen stood down and looked at me, and she said, "Johnny, for years because of the children we have stayed together, but now because of them we have to part. And either you go down and try that thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, or else out you go again. And that's how I came in. And I didn't think this would work either. Those last 4 years I drank, there wasn't anything I hadn't used to stop. Sacred things to me. You know, I had 13 years, 2 hours a day of religious education. You know, I swore on the Bible one time in front of my wife and my kids. I said, I swear to God I'm never going to drink again. And I said, you know, I never broke my word of honor to you. And she said, you know, kids, your father never has, and I hadn't. And I thought I used this thing that means so much to me, maybe I can stop. And 2 weeks later, I'm drunk again. I went to a minister for counseling every week for an hour for 18 months, and I leveled with him. And that gentleman, he read a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find out if he could best help me, and he realized that we lacked identification. You know, he said one time, you know, you have to ask God to help you. I said, God, Walter, you don't understand. You don't talk to your wife the way I talk to mine in the evenings when she calls me about my drink, and so God doesn't want to have anything to do with me. No, I know because I tried. So he realized that I had to find my bottom further down alone. You know, thank God for that. Then I went to a marriage counselor, a psychologist in Santa Ana, a doctor. He spent $2,000 with a guy. There wasn't anything he said to me that my wife didn't tell me for free 3 times a day. There wasn't anything he said to me either that wasn't the truth. Everything he said was the truth. He said to me one time, Ackerlind, he said, you know what's wrong with you? And I said, Doc, you tell me what's wrong with me. And then he rattled all my secrets out, all my emotional things. I said, yeah, you're absolutely right, Doc. And that's the reason why I drink, because I can't stand myself the way I am either. So then he laid a trip on me how I hurt my wife and my kids. And what do you do then? You do what I did. I went on the wagon. And the tragedy for us is this, that the more sober we become, the more we realize how we hurt our loved ones. And that in itself drives us back to drinking again. There's a lot of capable people in the field of alcoholism today, and I sure don't envy them, because the nature of the illness is still the same today as when I came in. As long as booze is doing something for us, it is really impossible for anybody talking out of using it, and that's the nature of the illness. And that's why I said in the beginning about you and I are the lucky ones, because we have a chance because of these evidences of one drunk talking to another in these rooms, you know. It's the most fabulous convincing that I ever experienced. Thank you. The last Christmas I drank, I bought a dapple gray Arabian horse. I thought if I had a hobby I could stop drinking. I was sober with that horse for a day and a half. And then I had 14 martinis for lunch and fell off the horse too, you know. And here I come into this little Laguna club in Anaheim, and they said, do you have a drinking problem? I said, no, I get along as famously with it. Can you do something for my wife? She's crazy. And that's how it is when we come in here, and we don't know it's going to work. So we got to protect our own deal. In fact, I tell you this much. If I had known how mixed up I was when I came in, I would never have stayed, because stopping drinking wouldn't have fixed it. But there's a line in the big book that says, more will be revealed. Thank God for that. And the same funny thing that the next day it happened to me. Here. My friend and sponsor, Charlie Vick, got hold of me that afternoon, and he said, come home with me and let us talk. And we sat in his patio, and he told me his story. And that's what I think is important in Alcoholics Anonymous. One drunk talking to another, and the identification between the two. And when he was through with his story, I realized that he was worse than I was. And he depended more than I did on it, and he was sober. I said, you were that bad and you can stay off the sauce? And he said, yes. I knew he was telling the truth, but I tried to wiggle out of it one more time. I said, Charlie, you don't understand. Every time I stop drinking, I get the shakes, and weird things happens to me. And he said, Johnny, you will only shake for 4 or 5 days. Then you never have to shake again as long as you live, and I didn't know that. I sat down and I thought, what information this guy's coming up with here, you know. And then he told me about the disease of alcoholism. He called it an analogy of the body coupled with the obsession of the mind. And he said the first drink is a mental one to make you comfortable. And then the body takes over and craves more booze, and you cannot control your drinking pattern or your behavior pattern. So things started to fall in place for me a little bit. That evening I was in a meeting. And when they read portion of chapter 5 that we do out my way, so all the meetings, I just said, please God help me today to stay sober. And it wasn't a big deal. You know, I always thought the spiritual experience would be something like, kaboom, yes, John, what can I do for you? You know what I mean? But it wasn't like that at all. It was merely a feeling. And my thoughts were these, that perhaps after all this, there's a way for me too. When I came home that night, I said to Karen, I said, it happened to me tonight. I don't have to drink anymore. And she said, your eyes look different. I haven't had to drink alcohol, any codeine, cough medicine, or strange pills, or funny cigarettes since that day, and it's 25 years and 6 months and 9 days ago today, you know. You all knew, you might sit down and say to yourself, well, it must be easy for you to have all the time on the program, but it wasn't easy then. And that's what we are dealing with right now. I was in great success when I came in here. I had a lot of anxieties about my kids because I wanted to be a good father, and I knew I wasn't most of the time. I was $36,000 in the hole, and they were all small bills and all due. And carrying suicide attempts just about drove me crazy. It's very hard to live with yourself when you realize that you are broken and not a human being spirit. But I didn't drink, and I went to meetings, and that's how it going for me for quite a while. But I'd like to tell you something. The first 2 months of my sobriety, I had an unbelievable fear. I couldn't handle nothing. When the phone rang at home, I just pointed and I said, and I split and hid in my closet, you know. That phone rang, and I had a 3-piece Brooks Brothers suit on, you know, but I just ran in and sat on the floor in my closet and wept, you know. I had about 10 days of sobriety. I sat in a stag meeting in Anaheim and blurted out, you guys don't understand, but I feel so goddamn guilty. And that was an old timer there that said, the reason you feel so guilty is because you're guilty. And there were guys like that that saved my life, and for the first time I could admit that it was my fault without reservations. You know, as long as we pin it on somebody else or someone else, nothing can happen to us. But I just came to the conclusion, whatever they had done or she had done or said, I drove them to it. And when I took it on that basis, I was free. But when that meeting closed that night, it was probably the most crucial time for me here, because I felt trapped. I felt I was in a corner I couldn't get out of, and I actually regretted that I had copped out and admitted it was my fault. The only thing I had going for me here then was this, that I knew under no circumstances could I go back to drinking again. No matter what, I couldn't escape for booze anymore. I had done enough damage. I had really no more rights when it came to liquor, and whatever was coming my way, I just had to plain face the music, but I couldn't split with booze anymore, so I had actually taken the first 2 steps in this program and didn't know it. But how do you turn your will and life over to the care of God, is the understanding? What's the spiritual experience in these rooms? Well, that happened to me moments later, the same evening. As I stood all alone and afraid, this guy came up to me. Never saw him before. And he just comes over and put his arm around me and said, Johnny, don't worry, everything is going to be all right. And I believed him. That was a turning point for me. It was just like those guys had my welfare thought, and I just trusted them. For quite a while, the same guys really gave me the courage to face my wrongs and my difficulties, because they talked to me in a fashion I never experienced before, because they didn't point fingers and there was no judgment. They just shared their own experiences from heart to heart. And this goes on in these rooms is really the most healing commodity that we can offer or being offered. It suits us back to good health, and it gives us a God of our very own that we can trust on any condition is here for everybody. You know those moments of clarity where we have these rooms? That's God's Eskimo that He sends us. It's really something. It's decision time in AA when we hear these, when we have these moments of clarity that He calls it. I tell you what it is. It's really like this. It's decision time. You know, if we grab hold of that and say, I'm going to find out what those guys or girls are talking about, then a miracle happens. But if for any reason that we discard it and say, I'm going to do this on my own, it seems like we have to get hurt some further. And why is it so necessary that we do it alone when we do it so well together? And that's what these rooms are all about. I actually envy you newcomers what you're going to find out about yourself providing you go to meetings. I plain envy you what you're going to find out about yourself. And you don't believe me now, and I didn't believe it then, but it was actually the greatest opportunity I ever had in my life when I was beaten down to nothing. So don't fret it. We have all been there. You sit in an opportunity. If you throw in the towel and let us love you and help you. I can't believe for a moment that God would let us go through all those things and then bring us in here and show us this way to live if He didn't have plans for us. It wouldn't make any sense at all. Karen didn't believe I was going to stay sober when I first came in. I had disappointed her so many times she didn't dare to believe it. But I tell you, as far as I'm concerned, it's worthwhile to fight for sobriety. I don't have anything in my life with any value to it that I haven't had to work very hard for. And now it was my time to be compassionate to her and a little understanding. And it's all right. I mean, she almost gave her life for me. And so it goes. And I tell you something, it doesn't matter. God sends out some messages in between in this despair we are at times. You know, I tell you, she said something that was a little intimidating one morning, you know, and Carolyn and Claudia, they said, I wonder if he's going to come home drunk or sober. You know, when I drove up in the driveway at 4:30 in the afternoon, they sat in their room and looked out the window, and when they saw I was sober, they just smiled at each other. You know, see, that's what happens. I couldn't break the hearts anymore. And that's what God sends us, these little incidents that happens, that it's worthwhile to fight for all, you know. To all fall in place eventually. One time she said, before I had the booze as a crutch. Now you have those goddamn meetings. Are you that kind of a weakling? You can't stand on your own 2 feet? And I said, yes, I am that kind of a weakling. And she said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to a meeting because I don't want to get drunk anymore. And that was the day when she realized that I was not on the wagon. Something had happened to me. And then she joined the program of Al-Anon. It has really been a fabulous love affair ever since. See, you and I are strong when we can admit weakness. That's all the strength and survival here. We don't have to prove nothing because this is bigger than all of us. That's why we have the ABCs in chapter 5. It says, God could and would if He was sought. Long ago now, she said, you know, it wasn't always your fault. Long ago now, she said, you know, this life we live today is really the most fabulous adventure. You know, it was so hopeless and tragic has completely turned around. There's even a degree of innocence between us today, and that's almost impossible to believe, but that's just come to pass because she's just as busy in Al-Anon as I'm in AA. We have seen so many people over the years turn around and start to be good to one another. Nothing has been in vain. You know. I've gone to 5 meetings a week since I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. There seem to be a lot of meetings. I'm up 6:30, 6:45 every morning. I'm late to bed. I'm very busy. I work very hard, and it's a privilege as far as I'm concerned. But I tell you something. I live more normal than normal people do. The only difference, I'm aware of it. You know. I tell you, it's pretty exciting for a drunk to be allowed to live like a normal human being. You know, it really is exciting. You know, my two oldest girls were 13 and 10 when I came in. You know, when I drank, I had time for nothing, but it was just working and drinking all the time, 7 days a week. You know, I worked all those hours. It was like I delivered something, so I could invoice something, maybe took an hour and a half a day. Then I chased money, so I could get enough money in so I could keep this routine going, and so it was going all the time. After I came in and I have all this work and all this thing and all these meetings I go to, I tell you something, for 10 years I played tennis with Carolyn and Claudia, twice a week, for 10 years. That horse I fell off, they had him for 10 years. And I taught them how to write English and dressage a little bit like that, and I experienced my youth with those two kids. My two young ones, they can't even remember me drunk or drinking. Katrina very little, Johnny not at all. And I've actually experienced everything with those two that I wish my father could have experienced with me, and it's just like I've sensed his presence all along here. There's no mysteries where I live with myself anymore. It's just a different kind of a communication. It's a beautiful thing. I like to tell you that my two young ones have had more problem in their lives than the other two. Ain't that strange? I mean, they have had me all these years. They can't even remember me drinking. And Katrina had the same personality as I had, you know, and desperate need for approval, never feeling she was enough, and contemplated suicide when she came into 14 and 15 years of age. And I tell you, she has been in Al-Anon for 13 years. And right now she has 3 years and 8 months of sobriety. And she realized that she drank every day. She said to me that time, and she lives up in Montana, she said, you know, Dad, I sat there 11 o'clock at night. It was like total degradation. And I knew that if I had to defend my drink, and I was thinking my uncle, how he has done it for 20 years or more. And she said, I realized that if I should defend my right to drink, I would lose my marriage and lose my little son. And I just went over to the phone and called a friend in AA, and I said, you know, this is Katrina, I drink every day, will you help me? And she hasn't had a drink since, and she's beautiful and free. I was up there 4 months ago and visited. She took me to secret places where she found herself in her program and her God and so on. And something else. And my son, he was hooked on drugs and pot for 4 years when he went through Laguna Beach High School. He sat on that hill in Laguna and got stoned every night. 1st of May this year here would be 9 years without drugs and pot and so on, you know. Yeah. It's hard when it comes to our kids. Thanks to this, I never had to give them any ultimatums that involved total ejection. I always left the door open, you know. And it was a big day for me when I was right and didn't have to say nothing. It was even a bigger deal when I could give everybody else the right to be wrong and I didn't have to interfere in God's timetable. It's a beautiful thing what you taught me here. You know, I love the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think that a big, you know, I'm just going to cover 2 things and then 2 others, and then I'm going to sit down, you know, and be about 15 more minutes. Is it all right with you? Okay. We're going to do it anyhow. Talk about the inventory. It seems to me that that is some hurdle for some people. And I give you a little help here. They have a long form and a short form. First, write down the 4 things you have decided not to tell anybody, even under severe torture. It will save you 62 pages of writing. You know, I didn't think that the inventory would do much for me. I thought nothing would change. But Charlie told me I had to take it or else I wouldn't stay sober. And I tell you, I was so insincere, I took it I'm going to prove to them that it makes no difference. And then I took the inventory, and things changed for me. And I tell you, it was really strange, because it was like I felt like I had fulfilled the contract for sobriety. I didn't have any fears about getting drunk again. It was almost like I say, like I'd fulfilled the contract for sobriety. I had a deep feeling that God had forgiven me. And from then on, it just, I could elaborate this quite a bit more, you know. But now, I saw through the inventory, I saw the repetition in the same areas throughout my life. You know, when I was 12 and 13, 17, 18, 21, 22, 31, 32. I had made the same mistakes in the same areas throughout my life. And I just went down on my knees and I said, God, it seems to me like I denied all my life that I am like that. I've taken the opposite point of view. I've said it isn't so. I did everything with my own technique and willpower to deny it. And now I realize that this is precisely who I am. And I realize that I can do nothing about it on my own, and therefore I give them to you, and you can remove them on your time and your terms. And that is really precisely what happened. And when I came in one of those areas a little later on, I realized, now I'm going to show them I can do it. And instead, I made a phone call. I said, what do you do when you're in this kind of a dilemma? And the guy said, well, I tried it this way and it didn't work so good. I tried it this way and it worked better. And I thought, well, my deal, the way I'm going to handle it is a lot more sophisticated. But I tried it his way and it worked better. You know, and I tell you what happened there is, my obsession to prove something was no more. It was just like an exchange of view and idea. And from that day, you know, I have been absolutely open with everybody and my peers here. And it's a beautiful thing to, you know, that then what happens when things go well, it isn't, see, it will become slightly a fringe benefit and nothing else. It's a beautiful thing, you know. It's a gorgeous way to go. And then our number one deal is resentment. That's our number one deal. And I had a resentment. I had a little bit of resentment, my wife and my younger brother, but they were easy to forgive because I loved them both. My older brother was different. He was the reason for all my emotional things, my inferiority complexes and so on. And I tell you, they said that I had forgive him. And this guy, he was only 2 years older than I was. But he was an unbelievable. He weighed over 200 pounds when he was 12 years old. And he was a real bully. And he used to knock me silly. Sometimes I pretended he had knocked me out, and he really hadn't. And I felt so ashamed that I didn't stand up to him, but I didn't have a chance with him. And he always used to tell me how stupid I was, you know, and all those things. He drowned me when I was 13 years old. We were out in the ocean in Sweden. It was 15 feet depth there in the ocean, and he was a water polo player, and he just held me under until I couldn't move my limbs anymore. I was suspended underwater, and I heard my father's voice talking to me from the other side, and it is a terrifying thing to drown. And now I'm in AA, and I have to forgive him if I want to stay sober. I said, hey, how can I forgive him? I mean, am I some sort of a second-class citizen just because I have joined Alcoholics Anonymous? There got to be something more to this. And I said, please give me some directions. And they said, pray for him. And I prayed, and I felt phony. And then one guy said, try to understand your resentment. And I did. Then I turned it around, and I said, why did he dislike me so much? And that's another deal. And it just fell in place for me. I realized that why did he dislike me and hate me so much? I tell you what, it just came to me. I saw the whole picture. It so happened, I realized my father favored me. When I was little, I was absolutely adorable. My father used to hug me and lift me up in the air, and my brother, he was obese, and he stood on the side there and just watched the show. And I realized, oh my God, he needed more love than I did. He is such an introvert, and I was in the way. And I just had an unbelievable desire to set this thing straight between us. And I realized all his life he lived to get the approval of my father. You know, he had so many obstacles when he grew up, his size and his obesity and everything else. When he came into junior high school, he took gymnastics 7 days a week, and he became one of the finest athletes in Sweden. He was in the Olympics 3 times, carried the Swedish flag, and he was a beautiful man. And you know, the strange thing is, I thought, how my opportunity to write him what would happen. Now, at that time, I hadn't heard from him for 15 years. The next day, I had a long letter from him. Now, he is in his 40s someplace, you know. And here I have this long letter, and he's rattling up everything I'm thinking about. How he took gymnastics, and how he became an officer and a gentleman, and he lived in this castle out of Stockholm, and everything to get my father's approval, you know. And he died when he was 9 years old. And I sat down and I thought, my God, he's still trying to get the approval from the old man. And I just wrote him this little line and said, dear Bartu, if our father would have been alive today, he would have said, you have succeeded beyond my greatest expectations. Your loving brother, John. I haven't had a resentment since. But I tell you the payoff of this. I lost my inferiority complex. You know, it's an amazing thing, these surrenders that Paul talked about today. We don't know what's going to happen. There are things that happens to us that we never count on even, you know. I love the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I love these, that we share our experiences and experiences only. And you know what, we have little longevity in the program. What happens to us is really this, that we really come to understand other human beings a little bit better, and it's beautiful. Now, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to talk about the fellowship and make one point of it, and then I'm going to sit down. But, you know, I love the program. I like the big book. I like sponsorship. I went 12 steps in the 12th editions. You know, I like the first line in the big book that says, we were 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. It's a beautiful promise there. But it takes a while before the whole thing falls in place. And in the meantime, the fellowship have a great impact. And I know I'm a little late, but I know that these old-timers, they go crazy when you go overtime. I have a friend in Glendale, his name is Bob Lemke, and he's a full-blooded German. And I had a little problem with the Germans during the war. But I knew Bob he even talks funny, you know. I knew him for 4 years, and I realized I loved him. For 15 years he has invited me to Glendale to talk on his birthday. But he's one of these staunch AAs that say you never save any souls after 10, that type, you know. And it was 10 o'clock, and I had about a minute and a half to wrap up my story. And he sits back down and shouts, for God's sake, John, it's 10. I said, Lemke, this is only an AA meeting. We ain't marching into Poland tonight, you know. I had another friend of mine in Anaheim. His name was Bill Schellenberger, and he was a framing contractor, and he had a little hard time to get sober. And when I 12-stepped the Germans in the beginning, the first 2-3 years, I wasn't very nice. I usually said, don't rush into this thing. It's so good out there, you know. I wanted them to suffer a little longer, you know what I mean? But he got sober and we loved each other. And this episode I'm going to tell you about the fellowship. That was a big developer out my way. His name was Alva Wilson. He was a 70-year-old gentleman, and he built about 1,200 homes a year. And Bill was framing 110 houses out in Mission Viejo. It was in July, 84 degrees hot, and I should go out and see what my guys were doing. And I came down the street out there on the tract, and Bill is up on the second floor nailing on roof rafters, you know, and he was a good-looking guy, you know, 6'2", and a red handkerchief around his forehead, no T-shirt, and a pair of shorts, the big belt, the big hammer, construction boots, and the 30-foot tape. You know what I mean? And he's up there hammering, and he saw me. And yes, when he saw me, Mr. Wilson and 6 vice presidents come down the cul-de-sac to look the project over. But Bill saw me, and he said, "George!" And he leaped from that roof, you know, right down in the dirt there, you know, and the smoke is flying, and he threw himself around me and kissed me twice, you know. Here we are, 2 big guys, you know, wow, you know. And Mr. Wilson stood out and looked at us. He said, "What's going on with you guys, you know?" And Bill said, "Oh, Mr. Wilson, old John and I went through Alcatraz together, you know." But he knew better. He stood down and looked at us, and he was real serious. In fact, there are tears in his eyes. And he said, "No, I don't think so. But whatever it is, it's beautiful." And that's the fellowship. You know, that's the fellowship. Chuck Chamberlain, when he lived amongst us, he was trying to show us what was going on in these rooms. It's called love with no conditions. Love with no conditions. You and I can be who we are and what we are, and in spite of it, we are loved. It's the most beautiful thing that goes on in this meeting. And then, because of this ism that we have, it makes us belong. We belong to one another. There's a sense of belonging in these rooms that at times is absolutely haunting. It's a fact and a reality that alone we cannot do it, but together we can. And that's where it is. The fellowship will carry us when we can't care for ourselves. I like to mention for you that most every afternoon I go down to the beach where I live and swim for half an hour. That's the time of the day when I'm alone. That's the time of the day when I look over my life and my priorities. That's the time of the day when I have the most intimate privacy. You and I call it the 10th and 11th step. And I cannot but realize the miracle of this program of ours that we can live without alcohol. That is really the miracle of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then when we put down no conditions in our sobriety, when we have no reservations about the 12 steps and the 12th tradition, this way of life that's laid out for us, and we practice these principles in all of our affairs, what happens to us then is really this, that we men and women can live out there in that world where the conflicts are, where we used to get in trouble. And we will fit in out there, and we will be part of the whole deal. We can really be like God's kids, like we were intended to be in the first place. Think about that. Any other therapy pertaining to this series of illness of ours, people are usually confined behind doors and walls and locks and bars. It's not in jail we have a problem with liquor. It's not in the institution and the care units, because we cannot remain in there forever. Eventually we have to go out in the mainstream of life and living, and that's what this is all about. And when we start to live and lead lives where we don't have to justify our own actions, we can really take these strong feelings and emotions we have within ourselves and turn it all into positive. And I know for a fact there's a lot more good thing out there than there are bad, and if that ain't the payoff, I don't know what is. If I have said nothing tonight that you can identify with, just go to another meeting tomorrow. But if you would believe this and take this with you when you leave this place tonight, if you're a little bit like I was when I first came in, I woke up with two things every morning. It was loneliness and fear. If you can just believe this, that we only wish you well, and we only want good things for you. If you can just believe that and take that with you, you will never wake up lonely anymore, because you know by now there's a way to go and to live, and God bless you and thank you.